Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going way back in time.
Thousands of years.
Yeah, thousands of years to ancient China.
To explore warfare and strategy and how it all evolved.
And what better guide than the art of war, right?
Absolutely. We've got excerpts from the actual text
Oh, cool.
and the general introduction so we can really see the historical context.
I mean, it's kind of wild to think that this book is still studied today
Oh, yeah.
by like business leaders.
In modern Asia, it's incredible how relevant it remains.
Even just everyday people, right?
Absolutely.
But okay, so how do we even get from like villages fighting to this like a legendary book of strategy?
It's a heck of a journey. Imagine like 4,000, 5,000 years ago,
Okay.
Neolithic villages probably fighting over resources, territory, you name it.
Right, basic survival stuff.
Exactly. And that need, that conflict, it forced them to get creative.
So they had to invent better weapons.
For sure.
Yeah.
And smarter tactics, and even how they organize themselves, like who's in charge, how do we cooperate?
So like fighting literally forced them to level up.
Exactly. And as time went on, those little villages, they grew into states, kingdoms.
Right, so the scale of everything just explodes.
Exactly. Warfare got more complex. They couldn't just rely on brute force anymore.
They had to actually think ahead, plan things out.
Right. They started recording what worked, what failed. That's the beginning of military science.
Wow, so those early battles were like the first research and development?
In a way, yeah. And eventually, from those battlefield lessons, you get a book like The Art of War.
But the art of war, it's not just about winning battles on the battlefield, is it?
You got it. It's bigger than that. It's about achieving your goal, your objective, without even fighting if possible.
Right, so it's like the ultimate guide to outsmarting your opponent?
You could say that. It's about understanding the whole situation, all the factors involved.
Okay, so before we dive into the book itself,
Yeah.
give us a little historical context. Like, when was it written and who wrote it?
Ah, well, that's where things get interesting. See, The Art of War is part of something called the 7 Military Classics.
Okay.
They were compiled much later, during the Sung Dynasty.
Oh, wow. So it was like a greatest hits compilation.
Kinda, yeah. But these texts were super important. Anyone wanting to pass government exams, get a good position.
They had to know this stuff.
Absolutely. To be considered a strategic thinker, a leader, you had to master these classics.
So it was like ancient China's must-read for anyone who wanted to be in charge.
Pretty much. Think of it like their version of an MBA. Leadership, negotiation, decision-making, it's all in there.
Amazing. It's like a crash course in power dynamics, but from thousands of years ago.
Exactly. And that's part of why it's still relevant today. These fundamental principles haven't changed that much.
Okay, so let's go back to the Shang Dynasty then. This is like 1766 to 1045 BC.
Right.
And they were all about chariots, ancestor worship, and this really interesting idea called the dynastic cycle.
Ah, yes, the dynastic cycle. This is key to understanding how the Chinese viewed history. They believed it went in cycles.
Cycles?
Yeah. You'd have a righteous ruler establish a dynasty. There'd be peace and prosperity for a while.
Sounds nice.
Right. But then corruption sets in. Things weaken, and bam. Someone new overthrows them, and the cycle starts all over again.
So it's kind of like a cosmic soap opera?
Uh-huh. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
And the Shang dynasty, they believed they had overthrown the previous corrupt Xi dynasty.
So they were living proof of this whole cycle thing.
Exactly. They saw themselves as part of this grand historical pattern.
Okay, so enough about the cycle. Let's
Yeah.
talk about those chariots. I mean, riding one into battle, that had to be intense.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine? The noise, the chaos, the adrenaline.
So how did it actually work? Like, how did they fight using chariots?
So picture this. You've got a chariot, right? And it's got a crew of 3.
3 people crammed into one chariot.
Right. The driver in the center, he's steering, of course. Then on one side, you've got an archer picking off enemies at a distance,
And on the other side.
a warrior wielding a dagger axe for close combat.
Whoa, a 3-man war machine. But I bet it took some serious skill to actually handle those things in battle.
Oh, absolutely. Chariot warfare wasn't just about strength. It was about precision, coordination.
And probably a lot of luck, too.
Uh-huh, probably.
Yeah.
The driver had to navigate rough terrain, avoid obstacles, and react to what the enemy was doing.
All while keeping his crew alive.
Exactly. It was a high-pressure job for sure.
And you said these chariots were also status symbols, right?
Yeah. Owning and commanding a chariot, that meant you were someone important, part of the elite.
So battles were kind of like a chariot fashion show.
Uh-huh, in a way, yeah. They were showcasing their power, their wealth, their prestige.
It was like a high-stakes chariot race with a side of, life or death combat.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
But as impressive as chariot warfare was, it didn't last forever.
What happened? Did the horses get tired of pulling them around?
Uh-huh, no. A few things happened. First, you had new technologies come into play.
Like what?
The crossbow, for example. It was more powerful than a bow and arrow, easier to use, and could really change the tide of battle.
So, technology changing the game, same as it ever was.
Right. And along with that, you started seeing armies rely more on infantry and cavalry.
Foot soldiers and horsemen.
Exactly. Instead of these small elite chariot units, you had massive formations clashing head-on.
So the scale of everything got even bigger.
Oh, yeah. We're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers involved in some battles.
Whoa, and I bet the casualties were pretty horrifying.
They were. It was a brutal period of warfare, no doubt about it.
It's hard to even imagine.
It is. But it's also the time when we see the rise of some truly brilliant military minds.
Like Sun Tzu.
Well, not quite yet. He comes a little later.
Yeah.
But we do see figures like Sun Tzu, who pulled off that incredible victory at the Battle of Malin.
Oh, yeah, we touched on that earlier. Remind me, what was so special about that battle?
Well, Sun Tzu was facing a much larger, more powerful Wei army.
So he was the underdog.
Big time.
Bah.
But Sun Tzu, he was a master of strategy. He knew he couldn't win a straight-up fight. So he decided to outsmart his opponent.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How'd he do that?
He had his troops reduce the number of cooking fires in their camp each day.
Cooking fires.
Yep. He wanted the enemy to think his army was shrinking, that his men were deserting.
He was playing mind games. I love it.
Haha, exactly. And it worked perfectly.
Oh.
The Wei general, he saw this weakening army and got cocky.
He thought he had an easy win.
Right. So he charged ahead with his fastest troops, eager to touch what he thought was a demoralized enemy.
But it was a trap.
Oh, yeah. Sun Tzu had anticipated this move. He'd concealed thousands of crossbowmen in the hills along the Wei army's route.
Whoa, so when the Wei troops marched into this kill zone...
They were ambushed, completely decimated.
That's incredible.
It's a classic example of using deception and strategy to overcome a seemingly insurmountable obstacle.
This is where things get really interesting. It's not just about brute force anymore. It's about planning, thinking ahead, using your enemy's weaknesses against them.
Precisely. And that's what we're going to see in the art of war. It's all about outsmarting your opponent, knowing when to strike and when to hold back.
Okay, enough teasing. Let's dive into this legendary text and see what wisdom we can glean from it. What's the first principle we should tackle?
Well, one of the most fundamental lessons is this: avoid prolonged warfare at all costs.
Makes sense. The longer a war drags on, the more resources you burn through.
Exactly. And the more lives are lost on both sides. As Sun Tzu himself wrote, warfare is the greatest affair of state, the basis of life and death.
It's serious business.
It is. He stresses that war should be a last resort, only entered into after careful consideration and with a clear plan.
So no rash decisions, no jumping into battle without a strategy.
Right. You need to be able to achieve victory quickly and decisively to minimize the damage.
So how do you actually DO that? Like, how do you ensure those swift victories?
That's where the concept of shi comes in.
Shh.
Yeah, it's often translated as strategic configuration of power. It's not about the size of your army. It's about positioning.
So where you are matters more than how many soldiers you have.
In a way, yes. It's about exploiting the terrain to your advantage, creating situations where you control the balance of power.
So she is like playing chess with the battlefield.
You got it. A smaller, well-positioned army, properly utilizing shi, can overcome a larger, less strategic force.
So it's about creating a situation where even your opponent's strengths can be turned against them.
Precisely. It's a very clever way of thinking about warfare.
Okay, so she is all about strategy and positioning, but Sun Tzu also talks a lot about deception, right? Like, how important is that in warfare?
Oh, deception is absolutely crucial. It's woven into the very fabric of the art of war.
Give me an example. Like, how do you actually deceive your enemy in a way that leads to victory?
Well, Sun Tzu advises appearing weak when you're strong, for example, feigning inactivity when you're about to strike, and using decoys, false information, anything to confuse the enemy.
So it's all about keeping your opponent guessing, making them believe one thing while you're setting them up for something totally different.
Exactly. You're playing mind games with your opponent, exploiting their expectations.
So, like, you could pretend to retreat, make them think you're scared.
Right. And then when they pursue you, thinking they have the upper hand, bam, you spring a trap.
That's brilliant. So, it's not just about physical strength, it's about mental agility, too.
Oh, absolutely. And another key aspect of deception is the use of spies.
Wait, spies? Like actual undercover agents sneaking around?
Exactly. Gathering intel, sabotaging the enemy, spreading misinformation.
Whoa, it sounds like something out of a spy thriller.
It kind of is. Sun Tzu dedicates a whole chapter to the art of espionage.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He outlines 5 types of spies: local spies, internal spies, double agents, expendable spies, and living spies.
Wow, that's a whole network of undercover operatives.
And managing them effectively is vital for a commander, according to Sun Tzu. You need to reward them, protect them, but also be wary of enemy spies infiltrating your ranks.
So it's like a constant game of cat-mouse, trying to outsmart each other's spy networks.
Exactly. And it all goes back to that core principle. Knowledge is power. The more you know about your enemy, the better equipped you are to make strategic decisions and achieve victory.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, but we've only scratched the surface of the art of war.
I can't wait to dive deeper, but we'll have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're still digging into ancient Chinese warfare, all the strategies and philosophies in the art of war.
It's amazing how much wisdom is packed into that ancient text.
Yeah, and last time we left off talking about the power of knowledge.
And how spies can give you a real edge.
Yeah, that whole spy network thing, it was like something out of a movie. But before we get back to the book itself, I'm curious about the human cost of all these changes in warfare. You know, we talked about battles getting bigger, but just how devastating were they, really?
The scale of these conflicts was immense, and the casualties were staggering.
Yeah.
We're talking armies of hundreds of thousands clashing on the battlefield.
Hundreds of thousands. It's hard to even imagine that many people.
It is, and the losses were horrific. At the Battle of Maling, which we talked about earlier, over 100,000 Wad soldiers were killed.
100,000. It's just mind-boggling, the sheer loss of life.
It really highlights the brutal reality of war, even thousands of years ago.
It makes you appreciate why Sun Tzu was so focused on avoiding prolonged warfare.
Absolutely. Swift, decisive victories were the ideal, minimizing casualties whenever possible.
Okay, so let's get back to the art of war. One thing that struck me was how much Sun Tzu talks about different types of terrain. Like, why is that so important?
Terrain is crucial in warfare. Sun Tzu actually identifies 9 distinct types of terrain.
9.
Yeah, each with its own strategic implications.
Yeah.
It's not just about the physical landscape, mountains, rivers, forests.
Right.
It's about understanding how the terrain can influence the psychology of your troops and your enemies.
Okay, give me an example. Like, how could knowing the terrain help you win a battle?
We'll take dispersive terrain, for instance. This is where your army is far from home. Maybe their morale is low.
They're probably missing their families, worrying about what's happening back home.
Exactly. As a commander, you need to recognize that, address their concerns, boost their spirits, find ways to keep them focused.
It's like trying to work on a big project when you're super stressed about something else going on in your life. You just can't concentrate.
Right. You need to understand that human element. And then you've got light terrain, where the enemy has just entered your territory. They might be overconfident, feeling invincible.
So they're ripe for a surprise attack.
Exactly. That's the perfect opportunity to catch them off guard. And then there's contentious terrain, where both sides are fighting for control of key positions.
Ah, so that's where Shi comes into play.
You got it. That concept of strategic configuration, using the terrain to your advantage.
Okay, so let's talk more about Shi then. It's still kind of fizzy for me. It's not just about having a bigger army, right?
No. Shi is about much more than brute force. It's about positioning your forces so they can maximize their impact.
Okay.
Exploiting the terrain, creating a situation where you hold the advantage, regardless of numbers.
So you're kind of turning the battlefield itself into a weapon.
Precisely. Imagine like a small company going up against a much larger competitor.
Okay.
They're not going to win by trying to match them blow for blow.
Right.
They have to be smarter, more strategic.
Pick their battles carefully.
Exactly. Leverage their unique strengths,
Yeah.
exploit weaknesses in the market, disrupt the industry.
So they can achieve success despite being smaller, just by being more strategic.
Exactly. That's Shi in action.
I like that analogy. So Shi is about being resourceful, finding ways to overcome challenges even when you seem outmatched.
You got it. It's a principle that can be applied to any situation where you need to gain an advantage.
Right, not just on the battlefield, but in business, in relationships, even in personal life, right?
Absolutely. It's a powerful concept.
Okay, so we've talked about terrain and and we touched on deception earlier, but how do you actually apply deception in a real battle? Give me some concrete examples.
Sure. One example Sun Tzu gives is feigning weakness when you're actually strong.
Okay.
Let's say your army is well equipped, ready to fight, but you want to lure the enemy into a trap.
Okay.
You might pretend to retreat, make them think you're scared, disorganized.
You're playing possum.
Exactly. Make them think you're an easy target.
And then when they charge in thinking they have you on the run,
Bam! You spring the trap and they walk right into it.
that's awesome. It's like that scene in a movie where the hero pretends to be injured, and then when the villain gets close, they suddenly strike back.
Exactly. It's all about outsmarting your opponent, playing on their assumptions, exploiting their expectations.
So deception is all about mental agility,
Yeah.
about using your brain as much as your brawn.
Right. It's a key element of warfare, according to Sun Tzu.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about this whole concept of the orthodox and the unorthodox? I remember we mentioned it earlier, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on what it actually means.
Sure, it's one of the most interesting parts of the art of war. Sun Tzu uses the term Cheng to describe the orthodox,
Okay.
which is the conventional approach to warfare, following established tactics and strategies.
So, like the rule book of warfare.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But Sun Tzu argues that relying solely on the orthodox makes you predictable.
Ah, I see. So it's like if you always do the expected thing, your enemy can easily counter you.
Exactly. They know what to expect, so they can plan accordingly. That's where the unorthodox comes in, which Sun Tzu calls qi.
Okay, so the unorthodox is all about breaking the rules, being unpredictable.
Exactly. Surprise attacks, flanking maneuvers, unconventional tactics, anything to disrupt the enemy's plans.
So it's like that moment in a sports game where a team pulls out a crazy play that no one saw coming, and it totally changes the game.
That's a great analogy. The unorthodox is about keeping your opponent off balance, forcing them to react instead of dictate the terms of engagement.
I love it. So it's this dance between the orthodox and the unorthodox, right?
Yeah,
You're using the orthodox as your foundation, but you're always looking for opportunities to weave in the unorthodox to keep your opponent guessing.
precisely. It's about finding the right balance. Too much reliance on the orthodox and you become predictable.
Right.
Too much unorthodox and you risk losing control, descending into chaos.
So a truly great commander or leader knows when to stick to the plan and when to improvise.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, but a crucial one.
This is blowing my mind. It's like the art of war is a guide to winning, not just in battles, but in life.
That's the beauty of it. The principles are so timeless and universal, they can be applied to so many different situations.
It's like a blueprint for success, but from thousands of years ago.
And it still works. It speaks to the fundamental nature of strategy, of competition, of human interaction.
Okay, so we've talked about strategy and tactics, but what about the leader themselves? What qualities did Sun Tzu believe were essential for a successful commander?
Well, for Sun Tzu, character was paramount. He said a leader needs wisdom, courage, discipline,
Makes sense.
the ability to make quick decisions, but also to inspire their troops.
So it's not just about being a brilliant strategist, it's about having the right personality, the right qualities to lead people.
Exactly. It's about earning respect, building trust, creating a shared sense of purpose.
It's like that coach who can rally their team to achieve the impossible because everyone believes in them and in each other.
That's a great way to put it. And those leadership qualities, they're just as valuable today as they were in ancient China.
Yeah, whether you're leading a company, a team, or even just your family.
It's all about those same principles: wisdom, courage, discipline, inspiration.
It's incredible how these ancient teachings can still resonate so strongly today.
It really is. It speaks to the enduring power of the art of war. It's not just a dusty old book, it's a living guide to strategy and leadership.
We've covered so much ground already. Terrain, deception, the orthodox and the unorthodox, the qualities of a great leader.
And we're just getting started.
I know, I can't wait to dive into even more of the art of war, but we're going to have to save that for part 3 of this deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. There's much more to come.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been through a lot.
Yep, centuries of ancient Chinese warfare.
Explored the art of war, all the different strategies.
And seeing how they still apply today, even outside of the battlefield.
It's pretty amazing how relevant this ancient text still is.
It really speaks to the timeless nature of human behavior, you know?
Yeah, like the core principles of strategy and leadership, they haven't really changed that much.
Exactly. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to try to distill it all down, you know?
Yeah. Like, what's the most important takeaway?
Yeah, if you could only take one thing away from the art of war, what would it be?
That's a tough one. There's so much good stuff in there.
There is. But for me, it all comes back to this. Know yourself, know your enemy, and know the terrain.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about those three pillars of knowledge.
They're the foundation of Sun Tzu's whole philosophy, really.
But we've talked a lot about knowing the enemy and the terrain, but what about know yourself? What does that even mean, like in a practical sense?
Well, it means understanding your strengths and weaknesses, your capabilities, your limitations.
Okay.
Being honest with yourself about what you can and cannot achieve.
So, like, no wishful thinking, no overestimating your abilities.
Exactly. Sun Tzu warns against arrogance and complacency, you know.
Right. That'll get you into trouble every time.
It will. He stresses the importance of self-awareness, of being realistic about your situation.
So before you even start thinking about strategy, you need to understand your starting point.
Precisely. Only then can you make sound decisions, whether you're on a battlefield or in a boardroom.
So if I'm facing a challenge at work, for example, the first thing I should do is take stock of my own strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. Figure out what resources you have, what limitations you're working with.
It's like that saying, you can't win if you don't know how to lose. You got to be aware of your vulnerabilities.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads into another aspect of know yourself. Understanding the psychology of your troops or your team or your family, whoever you're leading.
What do you mean by that?
A good leader, they need to motivate and inspire the people they're leading, right?
Right.
They need to understand what makes those people tick.
Like their fears, their aspirations, what drives them.
Exactly. Sun Tzu believed that an army united in purpose, led by a commander they trust and respect, is an unstoppable force.
So it's not just about giving orders, it's about creating a shared sense of purpose, building those relationships.
Exactly. It's about the human element, you know?
Yeah.
And that brings us back to Sun Tzu's emphasis on avoiding battles whenever possible.
Right. Like if you can achieve your goals without fighting, that's always the best option.
He understood that war is inherently chaotic. Even the best plans can go wrong.
Right. There's always that element of chance.
So he advocated for a more strategic approach, using diplomacy, deception, even psychological warfare.
So it's like the best battle is the one you never have to fight.
You got it. True victory lies not just in defeating your enemy, but in achieving your goals while minimizing losses.
It's about being smart, not just strong.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that applies to so many areas of life.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have, from the evolution of warfare in ancient China to the timeless wisdom of the art of war.
It's been an incredible journey. Really fascinating stuff.
I agree. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise. But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final question. If you could apply just one principle from the art of war to your own life, which one would it be and why?
That's a tough one. There's so many great principles to choose from, but I think for me it would be know yourself.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, I think in today's world it's so easy to get caught up in the noise, you know, all the distractions, the information overload.
Right, it's hard to just like stop and think sometimes.
Exactly. So taking the time to really understand yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, your goals.
It's like the ultimate foundation for making good decisions.
I think so. It helps you stay grounded, focused, and true to yourself, no matter what challenges life throws your way.
That's a powerful message. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the art of war.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.